What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Dr. Pam Garcy. Pam, let's just jump right into it, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a psychologist and author in Dallas, and I also coach people. And we discovered each other through my blog on Psychology Today.
Yeah, that's correct. I came across a topic that is certainly something that I deal with, and I think a lot of people obviously deal with, but certainly men going through divorce, and that is loneliness.
Yes.
And what I like to do in this podcast is define things, and I know that can be kind of silly with something like loneliness. It sounds like what it is, but what is the definition of loneliness? How do you define it?
Yeah, I've seen different definitions of it, to be honest. So I think it's a good place for us to start. I would say that first of all, it's a normal thing that we feel as human beings. It's a normal process. It's designed to help us seek connection. And sometimes, though, we can feel lonely even if we're in a relationship. And, so I don't know, maybe some of your audience can relate to that feeling, maybe pre-divorce even. Um, but we can also feel lonely when we're not getting enough connection with other people. And we can feel lonely when we're disconnected from ourselves, believe it or not. If we're too distracted in our lives and we're not tuning into what our own needs are and really spending some time with ourselves, we can start to develop a sense of loneliness. But it's a distressing, uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
Is
And so why is that? I mean, I know the answer, but or at least I feel like I know the answer. Why is that a problem? Why is loneliness? Why is that feeling such a bad thing?
Yeah, well, actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if it's an enduring thing, it can have some consequences for us. So if you allow it to continue, I mean, it's there as a signal, right? And so if we listen to the signal and we do something about it, then it's actually an advantageous thing that we feel lonely. But if we don't listen to the signal, sometimes people try to medicate it away or do some destructive things. It can have psychological impacts. Also, long term, it can have an impact on your sleep, on your mood. Like some people get more depression because of it, more anxiety because of it, and it can even have impacts on your self-esteem and confidence if you walk around long enough with it. And they found that long-term loneliness can also be linked with health issues. So over time can even affect your heart, it can affect your immune system. So it's probably a good idea to pay attention if you're getting that signal from yourself.
Like feels like an issue, that's for sure.
Mhm.
So when you have an issue, the question is, at least for me, always what do I do about it? So, and that's kind of where I think we're going to dive into your blog post. What do we do? What do you do if you feel this sort of crushing sense of loneliness?
Yeah, it's certainly very uncomfortable. So the first thing is to remind yourself that you're probably having a normal human experience, and don't necessarily put yourself down for the loneliness. That's something that sometimes people will do. So remember that. And then I would say to start use it as an opportunity to discover what's going to help you. Sometimes it may be that you want to look and see, do you want to develop more social connection, and maybe within those connections, are you allowing for a real connection, or is this all just superficial kind of stuff?
Hmm.
You might want to also look at, are you accepting yourself as you are too? Because sometimes when we're very self-critical and we feel a disconnection from our inner selves, that can also work against us. So we want to look at how to mediate the experience, how to kind of interrupt the patterns that maybe are creating the experience. And my blog post is kind of about interrupting that.
How much of it is, or the challenge or the work? How much of it is what we tell ourselves about the loneliness?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I agree with you that it is, it could be a lot of it. So we have an experience, and in that experience, our brains are making sense of it and judging it and telling stories about it. And sometimes those judgments and stories can really defeat us. Sometimes those judgments and stories can make us feel really depressed, or really worried. So at those times when you're feeling a lot of emotional distress, maybe slow down and see what kind of story you're telling yourself or what kind of judgment you're placing on the situation.
When you're going through this process, this exercise of sort of trying to reframe or rewrite even, and I guess that's sort of the I think I know the answer, but what's the best way to do that? Like in terms of um uh the mechanism, right? How do you rewrite and reinforce some of these things? Is it, and I think I know, is it journaling? Is it writing stuff down? Is it a therapy session where you have back and forth and you're able to talk? Like, what's the best way to sort of reinforce or change, not reinforce maybe, but change the narrative um, that it's a bad thing, that you're broken, and all those kinds of things? What's the best mechanism?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing I want to tell you is that people are different. So some people actually respond great to writing, whereas other people are really in need of conversation about it. Especially if you process stuff verbally, it's going to help you more to actually have conversations with trusted people. It is important if you are the conversational type that you are talking to people who you feel are not there to judge you, but are really just there to listen and help you, unfold and understand yourself and have your experience. But writing can, yeah, be a very helpful tool as well. Um, Sometimes people respond actually to other modes like reading even, and watching films and stuff like that, because when you have various modalities, both modalities going in and modalities going out, you're going to process, because let's face it, divorce is a huge experience, like you so aptly put it, it's affecting all of your life areas. And it's okay to rely upon multiple means of processing. So I know it may be a slightly unsatisfying answer because it's not like I'm giving you the best way, but yeah, that's the truth. So
Yeah, I think this process is hard. I think life is
uh,
hard. I mean, I think
uh-huh,
life can be great and fun and awesome, but in general, modern life, it's just really, really hard.
uh-huh. Yeah,
And I
very
don't think there
challenging.
are easy answers. I think it's a matter of listening to this podcast and many other episodes like it and taking notes and figuring out, okay, how am I going to people expect that they can think their way out of problems, and you just can't. Your current thinking is sort of got you stuck anyway, right? Or at least it's who you are, how you are, and there's only one real way to change that. When I say that, I mean there's multiple ways, but it's a work. It's doing the work, right? But it
Yes.
takes effort. Um,
And
what,
within that too, I think if you are going to do journaling, there are different ways of doing journaling. There are ways when people do journaling that they expand the problem in their own consciousness as opposed to really
that's true.
working through it, and
Yeah.
if you ask yourself questions about the validity of what you are saying to yourself, go ahead and let it all out inside your journal, but then go back and be like, is this really true? Am I assuming stuff here? Do I really have evidence for this? Are there any other alternative ways of looking at this? Have I ever maybe experienced this same thing in a different way where I've made, a more useful interpretation that's worked better for me? So there are questions we can ask. That's where cognitive therapies and things like REBT, CBT, that can really help. And then also the self-compassion work is really useful. There's a lot of research on that, and I can talk more to that if you want to in a minute,
Sure,
but
sure.
that for now.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, sure. Yeah. There's a psychologist named Kristen Neff who did a lot of work on this, but basically there's different aspects of self-compassion that you can practice. And the first is to recognize that there's a shared humanity in what you're going through. So just simply saying, I am not the only person going through divorce. Like there are a lot of other people doing it. And, I feel isolated right now. I feel like I'm the only one, but I'm actually not, and recognizing that shared humanity. Um, Even labeling it as a moment of suffering can sometimes be useful, like saying, this is a moment of suffering, as funny as that sounds, just labeling it for what it is and acknowledging it. The second thing is mindfulness. So getting in tune with the present moment. We tend to race off into the future. Like right now isn't working, so the future isn't going to work, and like life is going to be terrible. But like bring it back in to the present moment, like right here, right now. You're handling it. Whatever it is you're doing right now, you're actually handling it. You're okay. You're safe. You're all right. And tune into what is working, what is okay. Take some slow breaths. And then the last part of self compassion work is your self talk. Start to talk to yourself in the way you talk to, someone who's dear to you. Give that same voice credibility in your own head. Yeah. So that, and then the other thing, I don't want to go on too much, but another kind of section of work that I find very helpful in such moments is the work on optimism done by positive psychology, and, which is a whole field of like how we function at our best. How do we optimize our functioning? And I think it's also really useful to look at how optimists get through hardship and borrow from them. So I can speak to that, or we can talk about
Yeah,
it.
no, that's an interesting one. Yeah, let's dive into that.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
It's just stuff that is near and dear to me.
Sure.
So first of all, like optimists basically have that they've studied optimists and pessimists, which are just people who think a certain way, and they found that people who think in a more optimistic way, they just tend to do better all the way around. They tend to be healthier, they tend to be happier, they tend to bounce back more, like they're more resilient. They tend to eventually earn more money and things like that. They tend to be more satisfied, etc. So there's some value in studying them and learning from them. And if we don't have that optimistic outlook at certain points, kind of reminding ourselves about what the psychology knows about optimists. And so there tend to be three things that optimists do that work really well that we can do when we're, facing some hard times and like loneliness after a divorce, or even during a divorce. So first of all, it is to remind ourselves of the temporary nature of it. So even though it feels like it's just going to go on and on and on, and divorces can last a long time, but that eventually you're going to be on the other side of this, and like you're going to probably have a day where you're not thinking about the fact that you had a divorce, where you're thinking about other stuff and you're feeling better. So reminding yourself of the temporary nature of all things. Second of all, is looking at it's not that you shouldn't learn from your divorce and take personal responsibility, but also the opposite is useful to look at where it isn't your fault too. Kind of look at the stuff that sort of was out of your control and allow yourself to just kind of be a human being who wasn't able to control everything. So which part of the divorce was external to you, was not in your control, and which things even now are external to you, not in your control. So you can kind of forgive yourself for that. And then, and with regard to loneliness, that temporary nature of loneliness, and that eventually you can have connection, and there may be some things out of your control right now, but you might be able to establish some connection. And then the last thing is, how can you contain the adversity, meaning not let it kind of leak into all parts of your life. So even though you may be feeling really miserable at a certain point, can you say, all right, I'm going to give myself, my whatever, 10, 15 minutes every morning to just sort of cry in my beer or whatever, or cry in my oatmeal is best. Hopefully in the morning. If it's in the morning, it's not beer. But cry in my oatmeal and, be depressed for 10 or 15 minutes and whatever. And then I'm going to shift gears and figure out how to have a decent enough type of day. And by the way, there's no magic in 10 or 15 minutes. It may need to be an hour or whatever, but can you contain it and give yourself an allowance every day to feel those feelings and have your experience, but can you also contain it? So if you do those things, you're likely to start fostering a more optimistic outlook.
So all of that sort of makes me, I mean, there's so many different things that you can attempt, right? There's so many modalities, just different, so many different things that you can make an attempt at. How do you know
Yeah.
if something is working? And obviously it's if you're feeling better, I guess, right? But that seems so very generic. Maybe the better question is how much do you give something a try? 'Cause let's say, I mean, one of the things that I say all the time is get a good therapist with that, which that's a can of worms to say good therapist, whatever that means. But how long do you give something a try, like journaling or therapy or a type of therapy or whatever? How long do you give something a real make real effort before you make a determination that this isn't working for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what you're speaking to is the issue also of effectiveness. Is it effective, and how long should I wait to decide whether something's effective? Um, and to some extent, what I'm about to say may be a bit arbitrary, but if because it depends what your goals are, right? And I hate to answer every question with "it depends," but it does depend what your goals are. I would say if you're doing a self-help technique, though, that you ought to start feeling some relief within a couple of weeks. And if you aren't, it may be time to get some help. Like there's really no need to just do this on your own.
Yeah.
There's so much available to you, you know, um, anywhere from support groups that are available at very low cost clinics if you can't afford, a therapist right now, all the way up to just getting yourself a therapist, and having a space to talk and to let your inner thoughts hit the air a bit and be held in a non-judgmental space so you can process through it and develop some self, understanding and wisdom around this. Because if you look at like the diagnostic manual for psychologists,
Hmm.
let's say we were going to diagnose depression in someone, we usually wait. We usually say, like in that definition, it says, these symptoms have been happening more days than not for a period of at least 2 weeks. So that's where I'm coming up with the 2 weeks. I feel like if your symptoms aren't abating with self-help mechanisms, that, it's a good idea to get yourself checked up a little, make sure that stuff isn't drifting into something that could become worse.
Yeah. Let's jump back into your list and let's go over number 4. It says habits can change. Sometimes we develop bad habits around loneliness. Um, let's dive into that a little bit. Talk a little bit about sort of what you mean by that, and how we can maybe change some of our habits.
Yeah, I love talking about habits. Because there are behaviors that they are things that we can influence. We can build coping skills, we can improve how we do stuff, and it's like within our control. So to me, habits are just a very empowering vehicle for change. But so some examples are like if let's say you have the habit of every day after work you just come home and do nothing, you can break that habit. Like you can add an activity in on your way home so that before you get home, you've already done something toward building a sense of community, or even smaller than that, just some sense of improvement of your life. Um, Also, like say you're in the habit of being unsociable, you can, you're just kind of keeping to yourself and sort of trying not to talk to anyone, being invisible. I definitely have experienced those moments. You can break that habit. You can practice being friendly, or you can practice smiling. There's a thing called smiling practice where you say, okay, I'm gonna smile and say hi to, let's say you're walking on a nature trail. I'm gonna smile and say hi to all the different people that walk past me today. And some of them may not say hi back, but I'm just going to practice being a little friendlier. It doesn't have to be, some big gargantuan task, but you can start changing the habit around that and see what results. Um, if you're in the habit of isolating yourself, you can instead join something and attend it. Join a meeting, for example, join a group and start attending it in a regular way. Even if the first few times you're not really feeling it, keep attending, because part of it is once you become a familiar face, it's easier for people to talk to you. And then you'll also have common ground to talk about if you keep going.
Yeah, I mean that's one that I struggle with. In terms of sometimes I isolate. Some of it is I'm just exhausted. I'm a single dad half the time.
Oh, yeah.
Job that is stressful. I travel for work. I have this podcast. I run a support group on Facebook, and it could be a lot. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'd rather just like lay on the couch.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it doesn't help that loneliness thing. Which, back to my previous point, like if you want to make a change, if something is intolerable or untenable, or you just don't want to deal with it, yeah, you got to do something about it. And I'm as guilty as anybody of just sort of almost wishing for it to change, but
Yeah.
nothing will change that way, obviously.
Well, it might. It just may take a lot longer because it's a waiting game.
Sure.
And in a way, it's understandable with all you have on your plate, for example, I mean, being a dad, running a Facebook group, doing podcasts. I mean, there's a lot to that, plus work.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that, there's a lot to that. Um, yeah, I remember when I was parenting my kids, it was like a whole different world, you know?
Yeah.
So how old are your kids, by the way?
So it's 15 and my youngest is 10.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah. So my hands are full, both girls. So my hands
Oh,
are
all
very
right.
full.
Yeah, very full. It's a lively household.
Yeah, well, and I mean, thankfully, in some ways, they're involved in so many things. Thankfully for them and for me in some ways, because I want them to have things, and it's horseback riding lessons, marching band, instruments. There's always something going on, which
Yeah.
is good, but it can be, it could be, and then doctor's appointments and dentist appointments and orthodontist appointments, and yeah, it could be
Oh, yeah.
exhausting.
It's a
Um,
lot. It's a lot. Do
yeah,
you, do
yeah.
you, yeah, sometimes like within that, there's this, I like to think about like doing the doable.
Mm.
And, what's doable there? Like for you might be a question, it's like you're already taking them to band. Can you say hi to one of the other parents? That type of stuff.
That's a great
Is
point.
just picking something, that will start, if you were having, loneliness or whatever, picking something that will start to remind you that you are still connected, in your world.
I think there's a lot of those sort of opportunities that you don't really realize, because you're sort of, at least for me, I'm sort of focused on the next thing and just getting like,
Yes.
I got this to do and I got that to do and I got this to do. And I sometimes forget that, to slow down, to stop. And I think that's one of the things that you mentioned, sort of, I think
Hmm.
six, I think I mean, it's sort of like that. It's just like breathing. Um, it's sort of like, essentially you're saying to pause, right? To take
Hmm.
a few moments to just,
Hmm.
and I think what's interesting about breath work and breathing, and it doesn't have to be as complex as breath work, whatever that means, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think when you do take that pause, sometimes life is, well, not oftentimes life is just moving 1,000 miles an hour. And if you can take that pause, and because it's moving 1,000 miles an hour, I think a lot of us are not necessarily in our logical thinking brain. We're not necessarily in fight or flight, but we're not too far from it. At least it feels that way.
Yeah.
And so I think
Right.
taking that pause, taking that breath, it allows us to sort of reset and get out of that fight or flight ish type of brain, and get back into our prefrontal cortex, right? Isn't that sort of
Yes.
it's not just the, pause and breathe, but there's actual science here happening, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's such a great point. That I like how you put it. It's not like we're totally in fight or flight yet,
Right.
but we're also not really present, right? We're sort of somewhere in the middle ground of it,
Yeah.
and yeah, exactly. As we uh, take a breath, just one slow deep breath sometimes, just to inhale, paying attention to the air coming in and noticing it coming in and then noticing it exiting. Just that little pause, can bring us into the present moment again and look around ourselves a little. Um, and in that pause, it's like even our social pauses are natural. Like even these pauses where we are having some moments by ourselves, maybe in solitude. That's part of our experience as humans, just like breathing. You know, there's we can panic about those things. That's one thing, but we don't tend to panic about our breathing. Like we don't go if I mean unless we're ill or something, but if we're healthy, we're not going at the top of the inhale, we're not like, oh my God, I'm pausing at the top of my inhale. I'm never gonna exhale again. And then at the end of the exhale, we don't go like, oh my God, I'm at the end, I've let out all my air. I'm never gonna get air again. We just sort of trust that we're going to be able to get the air that we need, and the pauses don't mean that we're never going to get what we need again. And it's the same with our social pauses. Our social pauses are kind of like breathing. We'll be able to get what we need in that way. Um, but yes, there is actual science. Breathing, if we slow down our breathing, we're going to engage the part of the brain that is going to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the stay and play response or the rest and digest response. So definitely a better place to operate from.
I think it can be difficult to take that pause to
Yeah.
remember um to yeah, to slow down, I guess, more than anything.
Yeah,
Um
slowing down. Yeah.
I'm gonna guess.
Actually, oh, sorry.
No, I'm gonna guess because you wrote about this that this is something that you obviously see probably a lot in what you do. Is that the case? Are you seeing a lot of is there an epidemic of loneliness?
I think that unfortunately there's a lot of disconnection, at least in the population that I've seen.
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure why. I have a whole bunch of guesses about it, but I do think it's important for us to kind of lean back into finding ways to connect with each other and just to there. I think some of the issue is that there's shame around loneliness. It's
Mm.
almost like none of us want to admit that we have these moments of loneliness, but it's so human. And the research on intimate relationships, intimacy, even just in friendships, is that intimacy is established as we reveal our vulnerabilities. And if loneliness feels like a vulnerable thing, and you reveal it, and someone else says, "Yeah, me too. Sometimes I feel that way too," then the shame goes away, and instead we get connection.
Think especially for men that can be very very difficult to reach out, to ask for help, to say I'm lonely. Um,
Mm.
it's a significant challenge. I think. I'm sure that there are women that face it too. I'm sure that upbringing is
Oh
everything,
yeah,
right? And if you have a family dynamic or situation that sort of made you that way as well, then I'm sure that there are women that deal with it. It
yeah, there
just
are.
seems like they're more so. It seems like women are more socialized to share their problems, to talk about their problems, and men are just not. We just don't do that. Do you think that have you
Yeah.
noticed a shift? Have you I guess two questions. One, have you seen that in your experience? Have you seen men that are struggling with these types of things? And B, do you think there's been any improvement over the last, I don't know, decade or so?
Um, yeah, I see just this little section of life, right? But in
Sure.
terms of my own experience, yeah, um, I think that men have their own set of challenges, that are specifically gender based, based on like how they're socialized and brought up. I'm just thinking about like in sports being told to shake it off when something is, challenging that's just happened, and just like don't feel the feeling, don't show up, don't cry, all of that stuff. Those messages sometimes require deprogramming, like you said, depending on how you're raised. But men have just as much capacity to feel these feelings and share them and benefit from them as women. And but I will say, women, there are plenty of women who stay isolated too. They don't want to reveal it. They've been taught to be the good girl, not complain, you know? So we have our own set of barriers to connection. But I want to mention one more thing that I didn't mention before when you asked me about some of the impacts of loneliness, because it directly relates to what we're talking about, and that is the research on addiction. And some of the findings that how do people actually recover from addiction is that connection is the opposite of addiction. So increasing connection is actually one of the ways we battle addictions in terms of the treatment of addiction. So, we're talking about with loneliness, when you see people who have active addictions, or, if you know someone who has one like that, they may be having a lot of loneliness alongside it and might not even see the connection.
I never heard of that sort of view. That's very, very interesting. I guess that's the reason why things like AA and NA and all those things are probably so prevalent. Well, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
also because there's a lot of addiction out there. But I wonder if do you think is that I don't this is your opinion, obviously, and I'm sure there are probably some studies out there. But do you think that addiction leads to loneliness, or does loneliness lead to addiction? I'm sure there's probably more to it's probably not
Mm,
that simplistic, but
hmm
I don't know, I'm just curious what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, Gosh, it's funny. When I went through grad school, my husband would always joke with me because the answers on the essay questions was always like, it's a combination, you know, because it's always like, yeah, somebody had, they were isolated in some way and so they felt lonely, or they felt like they couldn't share their feelings because they were shamed for it or whatever. And they pulled back, and then they needed to soothe their feelings and they didn't know how to soothe them. And so then they reached for something to soothe them, something outside themselves to help them shift. That's one path, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes I think people wander into addictions and then get lonely too, because like you have folks who will, like, their main social life or way of socially connecting is engaging in drinking together or drug use together, and that's where they feel understood, and that's where the bonding can take place. That for them, they've developed an association between their addiction and the limited connections they're getting within that, right? But then what happens is that, like, when they start, they're not really addicted. They're just
Yeah.
stumbling into it. But then as they get tolerant and they need more and more to get the same effect, they can actually develop an addiction. So, it's, and then the addiction can set them aside and cause problems and cause loneliness. So, sorry to be wishy-washy on the answer, but
No, I think all of this stuff is that. I think it's so I think again, life is hard, life is complex. I want there to be easy answers, but I say all the
yeah.
time, like if there were easy answers, I probably wouldn't have a podcast, because what the hell would we need to talk about, right? You just,
Yeah, that's true.
you know,
At least it's good material for a
yeah, for
podcast.
sure. Oh, I mean, I talk about this stuff as often as I can, because there are answers, but there's nuance to it, and there's differences people provide. Like I say all the time, therapy is great, journaling is great, but there might be people that go, I can't find a good therapist, or I don't like the process, and there might be people that like, yeah, I don't really like journaling, I can't really do that, or for whatever
Right.
reason, just doesn't work. So I think it's always fascinating to explore different ways of thinking about this and doing this, because yeah, everyone is different. I want to go back to the list, and I hate to do this in some ways, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
If there were one, if I said, I need you to tell me which one of these is the most important to get us through, or to make us feel less lonely, which one on the list do you think is sort of the linchpin, the keystone, whatever you want to call
Okay. I will pick. I like them all. That's let's see. I'm gonna pick only do now. I think that one is for me the easiest one. It's if I'm feeling badly and I'm having a lot of emotion and I just feel overwhelmed by the whole thing, or I'm even panicking myself over it, if I can just reduce it down to something that I can do, and sometimes I can just do now, sometimes that's it. Um, can I pick a way to take care of myself, shift the action that I'm doing? Can I make a request? Sometimes I'm thinking that, I can't solve this. What am I going to do? But if I can make a request, sometimes that can lead to a solution. Or can I take an action? Is there an action step I can take to help me feel less helpless? So I think sometimes when we make it more manageable for ourselves, it can just shift everything. Just because we're perceiving something in a certain way right now, it doesn't mean we're going to perceive it that way in 10 minutes. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me. I don't think it's a fair question, but I asked it anyway.
Yeah, no, it's fair. It's fair. And if you ask me tomorrow, I might answer something different. So, and which speaks to the nature of it all, right? It's temporary.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Well, and that's true of everything. Good and bad. Thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate you taking
sure.
the time. How can people find you? What's the best way to get in touch if they want to reach out?
Yeah, well, maybe the way you found me, they can go to the Psychology Today website, and my blog is called Fearless You. If you want to read the one on crushing loneliness, to using 3-word phrases to crush your loneliness, I'm going to have 2 more of those come out. I had it all as one long one, but they said too long, separated into 3 blogs. So you'll get 2 more that are just like this with other mantras coming. But you can also just look me up as a therapist on Psychology Today, and that's another way to get a hold of me.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you again. So the last question that I ask everybody is, what words of wisdom would you give to a man who is just starting his divorce journey?
Yeah, well, let's see if we can look at this experience as an opportunity for growth and development and expansion of yourself. Um, Not just a painful, terrible, horrible thing. I mean, you will feel some really negative emotions at times, but this isn't going to be the end of the road. You have a lot of good things ahead too. And sometimes these breakdowns in life precede our breakthroughs. So hang in there and be persistent, and don't do it by yourself. If it's not improving over a couple weeks, get some help, get some support. There's so many opportunities for help and support out there. And you've done a good thing to listen to this awesome podcast, Rising Phoenix. That's such a beautiful metaphor, you know, coming through the flames stronger and more powerful.
Excellent words of wisdom. Thank you again so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.